Hello and welcome to the program. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has agreed to hold elections in territories controlled by the Russian-led forces in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. Some of Ukraine's Western partners see it as a breakthrough in the diplomatic negotiations to bring about a ceasefire in the nearly 5-year war, but many in Kyiv see it as a concession. The elections would be monitored by the OSCE, but for many it's hard to see how they would still be deemed as fair and free. Critics say the elections would only strengthen the positions of the Russian-led forces and ultimately Moscow. On October 29th, the Ukrainian army and Russian-backed troops began the withdrawal of forces in Zolote 4 in the Luhansk region. What's next? Joining us in the studio is Olga Aivazovska, the director of the board of the civil network OPORA. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hello.
So just to start things off, the chairman of Ukraine's Central Election Commission in late October, he said that to hold the local elections in the temporarily occupied territories would not be possible. And then several days later, the withdrawal of troops started to happen. So what conditions, in your opinion, must be met per Ukrainian law, per Ukrainian constitution, in order for these elections to actually happen?
First of all, we are going to focus on international standards and Ukrainian legislation, because free and fair election, it's not an empty sounds. There are many positions which should be prepared before the start of such type of election, especially on the conflict area. And we have to remember about security first, because it is impossible to have free and fair if the people will not have opportunity to prepare their own political will without pressure, intimidation, threats, administrative resource, voter bribery, and so on and so forth. The second problem is freedom of speech. It's access of the media, Ukrainian media, and diversity on the ground, if we are talking about access of the voters to the different sources of information about political groups, about candidates, and from another hand, the candidates have to have access to voters without any borders or frames from different paramilitary groups. According to Ukrainian constitution, it's impossible to have political groups which are supporting terrorism or use paramilitary tools for their power on the ground. That's why any of the subject of electoral process in the future has to be far from the political paramilitary perspective or the basic vision from the previous part. And the head of Central Election Commission said that there is the main problem of preparation to the electoral process on these territories. It's about voter state budget database, because without updation of the list of the voters, we can't prepare many technical steps which are very important too. From another hand, there are international practices about conflict elections, and it's usually started 1 or 2 years after the end of the conflict. That's why we have
a time frame when this needs to happen, and that is not within the time frame. And from what I understand, a lot of people with pro-Ukrainian views have already left the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, which are under the control of the Russian-led separatists, years ago, maybe perhaps, or months ago, out of fear of being persecuted, pressured, or worse. So you have a population some of which is potentially supportive of the Russian-led forces.
We have more than 1 million IDPs, internally displaced people, near 2 million of other people who left Ukraine. Some of them now are living on the Russia, some of them are living on the EU, and we have not to push them back to their territories, but we have to think how pro-Ukrainian groups will have access to this territory to be a part of electoral process without any pressure and without any problems with security issues. I can't imagine electoral processes now on these territories. If we are talking about these days with these issues and these security frames, because before the start of electoral processes, we have to think how we will develop transitional justice to these territories, how we will back Ukrainian courts, how we will back banking system, because without official transaction through Ukrainian banking system, any of elections will be out of Ukrainian legislation and constitution, how we will back Ukrainian media, and how we will prepare the frame for voting for IDPs, but even distantly for these councils or mayors on the future elections. Okay, well, let me ask you this. Do you think this is President Zelensky's greatest gamble, these elections? I think that President Zelensky did mistake when he said about elections on the first statements without security frame. But after Ukrainian society feedback, after the media conversation between different experts on the media, he said that we will not have any elections before that time when we will back security on that territories. And it's the good frame for the future perspective and objective for the state. So on one side, we have critics who say this is a concession to the Russian-led forces, to essentially Moscow, and then we have some Western leaders seeing this as a breakthrough in talks, and to bring about an end to the war. But really, at what cost is this happening? I think that we will have a long time for the calculation and accounting the cost for such decision, and it will not happen tomorrow. And I recently read a report that when President Zelensky signed the so-called Steinmeier formula, it was, some people also saw it as a concession to Germany and France. What are your thoughts on this? Steinmeier's formula, it's not something new, because we heard about this formula from 2016 when Steinmeier was the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Germany. And this is a small puzzle of a big frame or big map of the peaceful process. But if we will exclude this puzzle from the picture, it's a bad sign for Ukrainian society that we are not going to think about security, about economical issues, about development, but we will want to accept the proposals which looks like pro-Russian proposal. But there is no any dangerous in Steinmeier's formula if it's a part of a bigger picture when where the security is the first step. Right, and the Normandy format negotiations were to happen as a result of President Zelensky signing this for this so-called formula, and it hasn't happened yet. And there's no set date of when it's going to happen. When the leader of France, Germany, Ukraine, and Russia are going to meet. It was pushed back from September to October and further on. What do you think is standing in the way of this, of the date being set for the Normandy format negotiations? I don't know many insights from negotiation based about the date of the meeting, but I want to highlight one thing. President Zelensky didn't sign the Steinmeier's formula. There is no any signature under this document from his side. This is an answer because it's not official document. It wasn't verified by Ukrainian parliament or Ukrainian government. It's a part of the bigger map of negotiation. And I hope that Russia will not request new positions about the pre-position for the meeting of Normandy format, because Ukraine did many things during this autumn or before from Ukrainian side according to the Minsk agreement and Minsk protocols. At the same time, Russia didn't do what they had to do. Right. Okay. So at the Lviv Security Forum, officials and representatives discussed the Steinmeier formula, among other things, and we have a quote from Ben Hodges. He served as the commanding general for U.S. Army in Europe, and we can play that for you now.
The greatest danger is that the West does not keep pressure on Russian Federation, on the Kremlin, to live up to agreements, to respect agreements, to respect OSCE. And here I think Germany has such an important role. The fact that we talk about the Steinmeier formula, I mean, he was the foreign minister, now he's the federal president of the Republic of Germany. It has his name on it. So I think there is a burden of responsibility on Germany to hold Russia accountable. Otherwise, then the Steinmeier formula is an empty bottle.
Right. So we just heard the retired general calling it, saying that Germany has the burden of responsibility for holding Russia accountable. Now, what do you make of this? What's your take on it?
I agree with him, and I agree that we have to share responsibility with other sides of negotiation process, even with our partners, because Ukraine under the pressure from different sides. From one side, as Russia Federation, it's a military pressure. From another, it's diplomatic pressure. But we have to remember that any negotiation process will end with the signature under the documents about peace. And all sides who will participate on the preparing process will have to share this responsibility.
If Russia doesn't comply and if it doesn't carry out its part of the deal, what sort of role do you think France and Germany should play if that scenario happens?
I think that our partners should play the more active role on the negotiation process. I know that there are many waves from Russia propaganda that all of our partners are very tired and it's long-term perspective process and so on and so forth. But try to compare this conflict with any others all over the world during 20th century or early 21st century. You will see that negotiation is long-term perspective process. You will see that peaceful process is for tens of years, but it's about security of whole Europe, not only security of Ukraine. And if we will be very children will not be ready to play for long-term perspective strategies, we will lose. Whole of European countries will lost.
I think that's a good note to leave it on. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you.
That was Olga Aivazovska, the director of the board of the civil network OPORA. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for more.